welcome back to the CLSR, and I'm your host, the counselor. Today we're going to be talking about passive aggressive men and passive aggressive women. And it's going to be up for you to decide, are there any real differences? However, I thought rather we would get some perspective based on what does the research say? What do the psychologists say about this passive aggressive behavior? Well, there is some reasoning behind it, and I think it's important that we look at that because there are definitely some differences and there's some commonalities for sure. But what is passive aggressive behavior? It's those things that involve acting indirectly aggressive rather than directly aggressive. So think about that, indirectly. It's almost like somebody who's sitting back, they're not immediately aggressive. So indirectly they're being aggressive. They're still finding ways to be aggressive. So also it's people regularly exhibit some opposition to requests or demands from friends or family or other individuals. And they're usually trying to procrastinate, express soreness, or act stubborn about it. So they're kind of passive aggressive. And we're going to get a little bit into breaking that down. However, I thought basically as long as we understand that it involves indirectly aggressive rather than directly aggressive. And you know if you have friends or family who are passive aggressive, but after we have some talk, I think you'll be pretty clear on some of these passive aggressive behaviors, and you might even see it in yourself. However, I think what we should do is talk about the men, from what I understand. And dealing with a passive aggressive man can be quite challenging. It could really work the relationships. However, if you're really going to put in some work and you really want to make the relationship last, you have to realize that. You're going to have to understand your man. And if you see some correlation here today, there is work to be done. But let's just get some clarity here. It's not an easy process dealing with a passive aggressive person. And it takes its toll on relationships if you don't know how to work or navigate your way through that relationship dealing with a passive aggressive man. Because the truth is, for the longest time, usually their behavior, it's not really noticeable. And this can take a long period of time, you know. And it can be very difficult when you do know what's going on. Once you do realize that this difficult behavior, you have a passive aggressive person in front of you, you know. And these men who are passive aggressive are very, trust me, you wouldn't even know it. That's why sometimes they're so slick, they know what they're doing. They understand the game. It's part of their makeup. Okay, so you won't even see it coming sometimes until number one, it could be too late, but sometimes into relationship. Because the truth is they put on a facade for you. They're very aware of what they're doing. And they could be those ones that act like, hey, they're your best friends. They'll warm up to you. They'll make sure that you're trusting in them. You know, you're going to be like arm in arm. They're very helpful, right? Loving, caring, romantic partners, right? They're very accommodating. And this is why this behavior helps them hide their true nature, because they act a certain way, and then after a certain period of time it really comes out. And the only way most people understand about a passive aggressive man is if you're either one or you've dealt with one before and this isn't your first rodeo. Because a passive aggressive man, right, usually, believe it or not, it stems from some dysfunction in their families. While coming up, there were some family issues. They were in some vulnerable positions, unsafe environments, especially during their childhood. We have to understand it's coming from somewhere, right? Their families, their communication patterns were just easily disrupted. There wasn't a lot of free communication going on in those families, right? It was always being delayed or, it was obstructed or shut down. There are families that do that. And that's how you start to become passive aggressive, right? As opposed to expressing yourself in the moment, these signals you're cut off. So then you get used to that. It becomes part of your character, right? Parents are very good at subduing a lot of this behavior where kids are trying to communicate. So especially when it comes to men, if you find you have a passive aggressive male, it's because this started out when they were young. They were having many challenges when it came to communicating. And one of the biggest was the authority figure. And the authority figure, whether it was the mother, the aunt, whoever, they dictated, and this person got affected by it. So they're finding alternative ways, sneaky ways, slick ways, very conniving, very sharp people. However, they're very aware of what they're doing. And they've mastered their craft over the years. So when they were shut down in one way, they learned to get it out another way, whether their anger, their frustration, or their manipulation, right? They're very passive aggressive people, right? And when you think that this family situation has shut this person down or limited their communication, and they've had to cope all these years, see, when they end up at your doorstep, you've got someone you can't even understand where they're coming from. That experience that they had as children, right? They learned these patterns, how to communicate right from their parents. It was just passed down, almost like money. And the kids were just afraid of that authority, afraid to express themselves. So this, right, the only other way they're going to communicate is through this passive aggressive behavior. Finding other ways to express these suppressed feelings. And when you do that, aggression comes on in this passive form. And it could blow you away. Take you right out of your game. Because you're like, who are you? Where did you come from? You're not the person that I've been loving and looking at. Where's this coming from? So that puts a strain when it gets there, because it's a way of coping. And it can come out through this aggression. And that's how men learn to express themselves, those passive aggressive men. And it impacts their relationships. And they'll choose people purposely, the total opposite of themselves. See, this is how sly and slick they are. They are choosing people who are the exact opposite of themselves. They're passive aggressive men who have difficulty or are incapable of expressing their feelings right from the jump, right up front. So they look for partners who are honest, forthright, caring, right, direct. And as their relationship goes on, right, that newness, that feeling, that fresh. You know, what did they say? They say the honeymoon period. Once that honeymoon period wears down, a passive aggressive man will whine, pout like a little baby every time their partner go to express themselves, get their attention. And you know what that feels like. It feels like 2 bricks on your shoulders. Because you just can't believe this person is like, where's this coming from? And see, now that we've talked about it and you understand where it's coming from, I'm giving you the higher percent. Nothing is 100% in this world. But I'm giving you the rough, high percentage of where this passive aggressive man comes from. And regardless of your relationship, if he can't express himself, this passive aggressive behavior will keep rearing its ugly head. Rather than being honest and declaring their anger or irritation or any problems they could be going through in the relationship, this will be extremely negative experience for them. And they will send you in your relationship, right? They'll make you feel guilty. And see, this is part of the manipulation. This is why we're calling it passive aggressive. They will manipulate you. Right? These feelings, if they're not expressed, they find ways to do it. To get this displeasure out there. And you will be the trip. The guilt trip. And that person, that aggressive man, he goes into victim mode. He's turned from his regular into victim. Trying to lick his wounds, trying to make himself better. And what happens, unfortunately, is that if he cannot handle these feelings and his ego, and see, this is a word a lot of people try to stay away from, is if this ego gets damaged, what does he do? What is one of the first things he does? He goes looking for someone to stroke that ego, to get those needs met. And that manipulation starts to go on, and it becomes dangerous. And next thing you know, there goes that extramarital thing. The cheating. The running. And see, that's not all of it, but I'm going to say this is one reason for sure where these relationships start to break down. And these affairs start to happen. Because this aggressive, passive-aggressive man has got his feelings hurt. And you know, when you hurt their feelings, they're either going to get upset or they're going to divert that aggression. And if you give them those words of truth, they need to be able to handle it. And if they can't handle it, they need some emotional support. So what do? They're not in your arms. They're going out there for that emotional support to help them lick their wounds. And once they stop licking those wounds, that's when the real fun starts. That's when they understand that they can't assert this anger, this frustration, this complete madness. They're not going to be able to do it. So from that point, they're never going to stand up. No. They're going to get sneaky. They're going to get manipulated. They're going to start playing them games. Doing things to get your attention. Like flirting and socializing. And trying to get at you. And psychologically, that's a game. So you're going to have to tell your friends now that you're understanding this, because a lot of this isn't even women, you know, you think it. You know it. You shake your head. You know you shake your head when you see this game being played. You're just like shaking your head like, nah. I see exactly what you're doing. The game that we play. And see, this is why we're going to have to talk about the passive aggressive women a little bit later. But this is the game that these passive aggressive men play. And they'll socialize and they'll kiki with the other women in front. And he may even go so far as to do everything in his power and his capacity to keep it from you as well, right? This is how he's going to pay you back with his thank you. This is how he's going to reward you and show his appreciation for the time you've given cheating. It's very common, especially in these passive-aggressive men. It's a game. It's a game for them. And is that the only reason why they're cheating? No, there's a host, but I'm telling you right now, if you can relate and you know what I'm talking about, it doesn't just apply there. It applies in the workplace as well, the work environment. It's just in the relationship, right? This passive aggressive man inside that work environment will be one of the most aggressive, most accommodating. Everybody likes them. They'll go out of their way to help other people do things around that workplace. But don't let that fool you. Don't get close to them. Don't think that passive aggressive man is your best friend. Oh no, because see, that's the first mistake you make. That's where you falter. Because see, despite that person giving you the impression they're going to go out of their way for you, they'll be the first one. They will do everything in their power on the back end. When they see you trying to rise, when they see you making moves above and beyond them, they will fight tooth and nail to bring you down, to make you look bad, because they do not want to see you move up the ladder. They do not want to see you advance above and beyond them. And they will sabotage any plan, any move that you make. They're crafty. They are schemers. They're hard workers at it. And you won't even notice it. You won't even know that they're talking behind and breaking you down, because in front of your face, they're smiling. They're profiling. Right? They think you're your friend. And this happens in friends, but this is what we're talking about in the workplace. It happens. Those ones will not let you surpass them. And you have to know that. That's why you have to be mindful of these passive aggressive men. But even in male relationships where they're friends and they're buddies, this passive aggressiveness comes on. Oh yeah. They'll act like they're with you, hanging with you. But if it comes to dealing with a third party, oh, we're all fair game until they start to feel threatened by you. They start to see that you're trying to do a little bit more than them. And then they change, their attitude changes. They start to prioritize their needs. And they use ways of expression, such as scheming, to stand and manipulate their way to the advantage point. And they'll never acknowledge this behavior, because they live in self-pity and they seek this attention. This attention that's not deserved at all. So if you're in that relationship with that passive aggressive man, you need to get some schema building going on, that background information, and help them work and change somewhat. If you're going to save the relationship. Because the longer this behavior goes on, the more challenging it will be for them to get over it. It's almost like following into a pattern of behavior. And once they're in for a certain period of time, it's hard to bring them out. They could be brought out, but they have to be willing participants. They have to understand that they're being passive aggressive. The moment you tell them they're being passive, they just get defensive. So you have to break some of the, and it's hard, it's not easy, because think of the years that this person has kind of gotten to this state. And some don't break out of it, no matter how hard You try to get them to break out of this, some of them aren't. And it ruins relationships. It ruins marriages. And they have a hard time coping a lot of the times. And some of them are fine being the way they are. They only see things in their favor, so they're not going to. But it's going to take some work. Just think about all the past, all the baggage that they've accumulated over the years that have brought to this point. Oh, yeah, there's a lot. And it's going to take some work, and it might take some professional work. You might have to involve a professional so that they can start to see the error in their ways. Because I have seen this thing take off where it's gotten totally out of control. And by the time that person's even considering pulling back, it's way too late. So if, you're not up to the task or you've been dealing with it for so long and that person's not, make some choices, make some decisions. However, just understand that a lot of the people who are passive aggressive, they fear confrontation. And a lot of times just they go through all these extra steps of using this aggression. And that takes a lot of work. But it ruins some relationships, right? With family, friends, and this communicating that they fail to do effectively solve issues in their life comes out. And it can be harmful. And it needs to be eradicated. But it has to be understood. And the women know too, because the women have their passive aggressive. Ladies, you got a passive aggressive side. I mean, think about it. When you're giving some of these sly, sarcastic comments at them, what do they call that? Throwing shade? Right? You know when you're doing it. You know when you're being passive aggressive. She did something or said something you didn't like. So instead of you being up front, you're throwing comments. You're throwing all kinds of shade their way. And you know what they say? Look, when you're an adult, say what you mean. Forget all the games. If you don't have anything good to say, you know the rest. But throwing all this shade and see, that creates a lot of issues in those relationships, especially among women. I see it all the time. I don't know, but it seems like some of them are really having some challenges getting along, and their shade's always being thrown. And it's a passive aggressive. It's either over jealousy, or they're new to the group. There's so many different reasons, but when you see it, it's obvious. And see, the one who's getting the shade, they got a decision to make, right? They got a choice to make. But the one thing for sure, if they don't react, they look at the other person and they just label them, They're like, whoa. They can see it, they can sense it, and that's why relationships go back and forth. You see even on these shows, these women are going back and forth, and all this shade, they could be having a dinner and shade starting to grow. And then you can tell by what I said, underlying issues. So if you don't have anything good to say, don't say. And hey, what about when, and it really brings people out of their skin too when they're doing that passive aggressiveness of that silent, right? But silent doesn't mean that they're not angry. Oh no, they're using it. They're using it. And you hate that because when you're trying to work with someone who's giving you the silent treatment and things got to get done. You're in a relationship, and you ladies know, once you give that silent treatment, and we're up there going, oh, well, I got to, or I want to communicate, and they know how to use it, and they use it well, because sometimes they feel, oh, he's too aggressive, he's got so much to say all the time, this is a weapon that I'm going to use, and they use it, and they know it's going to do something. They know it's going to frustrate. Even their girlfriends, right? And see, a lot of the times they get behind that technology. And you know what I mean, ladies? When you text somebody, right? and they don't get back to you in a certain period of time, how many of you are looking at that like, wait a minute, I text them, what is going on? Why have I not received a response now? Right? Oh, because, and then the first thing you think is, what did I do to them? Where did I go wrong? Did I say something? And it's mind boggling. But that's a passive aggressive person. And then when you talk to a friend, they're like, oh, she's always like that. She just uses it. And see, a lot of you use it. It's a weapon. Okay? Men probably do it too, I'm not saying, but I'm saying, especially amongst girlfriends, I hear that chat, have that conversation, and I hear those comments that, oh, I I haven't heard from her in 3 days. Oh, and then the girlfriend's talking. Yeah, well, remember what happened back there? So they're trying to get aggressive with you. You know what I mean? Or they're being slight in their comments, and they know they're manipulating. So they're using it as one of their tactics. It's a very common thing. And it's really a bunch, it's about a lot of people who are very immature, right? They don't understand how to really use their words and communicate what they really mean. That up front, they have difficulty expressing. Remember, we talked about that communication. Somewhere, this communication was used as a weapon in their life, and now they've adopted it, and they have not adjusted. And a lot of times, I tell you, people, a lot of the communication that we have, not all the time, but a great many times, it's been handed down from parent. It's what we're seeing, what we're experiencing. So this is something that women will resort to, right? And usually it's a disaster. They don't end up talking for lengthy periods of time, or it escalates into something, right? Rarely does it work out when this such strategy is used where one person's not talking. They usually got to come together, argue, or they just don't at all to work it out. But rarely is it one person just realizing, hey, there's a lot of manipulation going on. It's a strategy that people use. And if you're using it and you're wielding it, you need to look at your communication, how you're effectively or ineffectively communicating. But are you using it as a weapon? Are you being passive aggressive? The one thing that really gets under my skin is when women, you know, and I'm talking about men. I'm talking about men, but when women, like, they just, it seems like they hold things. And sometimes I kind of appreciate even with men. Men, we have our problems, of course. But, like, when we do have our beefs, whatever, we get into it, taking care of it, or we don't, or it just hits it. So the whole thing is that we want to move past these instead of dragging it on. Right? So, secretly, women hold these grudges, and it just drives me insane where you acknowledge, okay, we're okay, but deep down inside you're not okay with it. You harbor it inside, and you give the impression that you're okay, it was cool, we thought we worked it out, but once I'm not around, I'll see her again, and next thing you know, I thought we were moving past it, but it rears its ugly head up. So just keeping that grudge, that is really bad for the behavior because it keeps coming back up. You said that it was resolved, however, it keeps coming back up. So that's also being passive aggressive when you're trying to keep those grudges. And there's people that get tired of it. They really do. And that's one of the biggest things in relationships as well. When people hold grudges. And I know women have a tendency to do that. We're not going to label all of anybody. I'm just saying, you women know when you've been passive aggressive, when you hold them grudges. Even when the girlfriends are doing that, right? You're like, oh, she's still holding on to that. That was like last summer. Why is she still caring? I don't know. She's just insecure. I hate her. That's what they say. But the truth is that they carried it. And you want women to just cut it. And I know a lot of women want women to cut it. They want to say, cut it, please. Life is too short. I want to move forward. And see, even in your relationship, the funny thing is like, you could be shining in your relationship, but then you got a friend who's feeling that insecurity and vulnerability. And instead of coming out and saying, okay, you know what? Men don't like me. You know what I mean? I'm not going to get as many men as you. So what do? They become passive aggressive, and if you're the finer chick, then what they do is they try to make you feel bad about maybe guys liking you or whatever. But girl, this is some stuff that we have to talk about because I'm talking in these relationships, and this is stuff that's coming out. So, and it could be a number of different reasons. But if you're the one who's not getting the attention, even when it comes to dating, you know what I mean? Then it becomes that passive aggressive behavior, right? Where if you're even in the club with your female girl and you got a boyfriend who likes you, and then that girl, you really like the guy, but what's happening is that girl's tearing everything up for you. They're telling you he's not good for you. They're trying to keep you away. And yes, there are instances where they really are genuine in their feeling. But the problem is they give themselves away because they're doing it all the time. And you're like, oh my goodness, I like to be a friend, but you're always breaking down my game. And they're being passive aggressive. And then they don't like the friend that you try to be friends with because of this passive aggressiveness. So, they, and if you tell them, hey, you know what, anything crucial, they don't like it. They start to take it personal. And you can tell because the next time you ask them out, they're like, no, no. And then they play that game, right? They never want to go out for a while after that, right? So anything you ask them to do, oh, come on, let's just go out. And it's because why? They're angry at tick because you got the attention and they didn't know how to express themselves. And in your relationship, I know in mine, like there are times where that I can see the passive aggressiveness. If I'm talking to my partner and I say, hey, you know what? Can you do this? Right? And they didn't want to be told. Right? They were pissed at me because they didn't want to do it. They didn't want to be told. There was something about it that they didn't like how I told them. So they just kind of ignore, put it off, and then I could see it. Even though it would just be easier to just do it, no, it's a fight. It's an argument. And it's just like it could go on and on. And I see it. Purposely sabotaging others. Right? Yeah, you've seen it happen. Sabotaging behaviors. Like, I just remember not even that long ago, I had told a friend of mine that, you know what? I had something very important that I had to do, and I didn't have a ride, and they knew it, right? Because I was almost done this project that I was doing with another friend. We were working on a project together, so I asked my friend for a drive because I knew I wasn't gonna have a ride, and you know what? They had promised, oh yeah, I'll be there, and boom, and I needed, and I had to be there to meet them at a certain time, and I was waiting and waiting and waiting and see the drive that I was supposed to get totally dusted me off, didn't even care. And then I thought about it. I was like, ugh, I hate that. They knew how important because I reminded them. I texted them all the time. I even called them and left messages. I told them about my day that I needed to take care of this project with my friend. I had something important to do. And so they sabotaged it. They didn't even show up. They didn't even call until later. And it was like, oh my goodness. And it's because I don't know. Call it what you want, but you know what? They were just like really into this sabotaging behavior, and it's like sometimes when you go through that, especially with friends that you've known for a while, you just need a break, and it's sometimes enough to make you just want to walk away, right? Because you start to feel, are they really genuine? Are they there for you? Are they there to see you do your best? And you got to check that because some of them aren't. They're not. You know it, and I know it. That a lot of times when you're in relationships, the truth is, a lot of times you get along with people when you start talking about them and giving them the attention most of the time. Not talking about yourself or doing things. What the moment you start to talk about things you're gonna do or how well you're doing, it starts to change the game. And you can see that passive aggressiveness. So a lot of times you're not doing things to manipulate that situation. You're not walking on eggshells, but you know how it's going to change. But that person, right? The moment they're doing something, they want you to step up there. But then when you go to do it, oh no, they're coming up all kinds. And see, the passive aggressive to me is when you lie and say you're going to do something. And you got me hooked and I'm dependent on you to do it. So then what happens is you turn around and you don't do it, right? And then we have to talk. And sometimes we don't talk for a while. And I didn't talk to them for a while because I was like, you know what? They knew what was up. Like, it's just so. And then that's when you say it's so shallow of your friends to do like simple things like that, right? You know what I mean? Especially if they know you have another friend that you're going to do something with. They're going to try and sabotage that relationship because of that passive aggressiveness. They don't know how to tell you, oh, you know what? I get a little upset. I get a little jealous of, when you're doing that and spend so much time with them. Instead, it comes out like that. And that's how we look at it. And you know what? Instead of just saying there's an issue, they just act like they're fine. And then the manipulation just goes on. Oh, I'm good. I'm good. When they're not. They're not good at all. And they're showing you in so many different ways that they're not good. And it tests the relationship. You don't even want to joke about it because it really gets under your skin. And, it's funny because as we get older, our friendships, because you get a handful of friends, like, right? No matter how old you get a handful of friends, you want to make sure they're good friends around you. But then the dynamics change. And they're your good friends, but when it comes to them, it seems like the focus still has to be on them a lot of the times. And you got to keep it there to keep it balanced. Not too much on yourself. You got to balance that. Understand that. And and this is the thing about relationships, even as you get older, especially in your 20s, a lot of them have those where you're on and off with the relationship because of this struggle back and forth, this passive aggressiveness, right? Late teens, 20s, that's really when it gets wild. Even in middle teens, I think kids are maturing in a lot of different ways, but they're getting a lot of information. So a lot of these behaviors are coming out. So many things that are causing this passive aggressive behavior. But people know how to do it because of fear of confrontation is there in a lot of people. They don't want confrontation, but they want to manipulate, right? They prefer manipulation over confrontation. And they expect you to read their minds. It's true, they do. That's one of the common things. It's like when you want to go and talk it out with them, like say with them, that person that didn't give me the right. Remember, when I wanted to talk it out, I didn't talk to them for a while. But when it did come to talking to them, they expected me to know that was bothering them. When meanwhile, I was just being happy for myself, doing a project, had a commitment going on. They expect, and that's how passive aggressive people are. They expect you can read their feelings, especially if you've been their good friend, right? They expect that you know what's bothering them. And if you don't, they're going to show you, and it gets to that point. And see, that's what wears out relationships. Because sometimes you do know what's bothering them, and sometimes you don't. But a lot of the times, when you realize this thing bothers you, and they use this as a form of manipulation, then you get tired of it. So you don't even pay attention to it. So you're like, I know it might bother you, but I got to do me. So sometimes, right, you regulate yourself. That's what you do. You regulate yourself. We think it's obvious, but it's not. But some of us get to the point where we're so bothered by it, the manipulation, that we're like, we don't really care. It's just getting too much. And that's when a lot of times you take a break from the relationship. And see, this is the thing too. The break from the relationship. I think if we decide now that sometimes it's okay to have a break in a relationship from a friend. And you do, but the truth is, I just find with a lot of females, they female relationships is funny, they're complex. So when they do forgive that person, let's say you have a person you've had disagreement, a lot of passive aggressiveness is going down, right? And you're not getting along and you break it up. A lot of times, they'll get together with you and give you another chance and they'll just end up happening again. And see, sometimes that's when the relationships break off for a time. They'll go to someone else, but you can't keep doing that to them. You can't keep going back and forth through that manipulation, thinking that you're going to be friends, because the person moves on. It gets tiresome. And see, that's a psychosis in itself. Men do it, but women really know this thing. They have that part to them where they process all these thoughts. and they have to decide how to manage a relationship. And I think a lot of the females, and I'm going to say that because I talk with them all the time, they tell me, many of them, not all of them, but many of them say, hey, listen, some of the toughest relationships that I have challenges with are with my other female friends because of some of this passive aggressiveness. For whatever reason it is, it tends to dominate the relationship. And it gets to be too much because of imbalances here and there. And sometimes it is what it is. And that's why a lot of times they speak to guys or their friends of all different genders, right? And they just confide in them because it could be a challenge. That's part of it, right? We have our own problems. We can't say 100% in any, but we do have to acknowledge, right? We have to acknowledge that there's some passive aggression. One of the biggest ones that even happens, and it starts early, but it starts in elementary school, is that gossiping. Talking badly about someone behind their back. It's big. That is some of the most passive aggressive behavior that you could get out there. Because you know what's funny? It's never as much, and it's so funny because when you think of those relationships, it's never a secret. It isn't. And with social media today, right? People, the way they, and the funny thing is, there's not even delays in 2020. Before, it used to be a little respect. You know what? They're talking. Next day, maybe it comes out or so. Now it's boom. You text it, oh, did you know it's such and such? And that creates a lot of issues in the relationships. All the gossiping, the carrying on, talking badly about someone behind their back is big. Right? It's backhanded. It's sneaky. It's conniving. And it's just because they don't have the, right? They don't have the power to stand up and say it to the person's face. So it just goes, boom. I'm going to be passive aggressive. I'm going to manipulate this situation so this person, and just to get my needs met. Really, it's about needs. We're going to do podcasts about our needs because when we consider a lot of the decision making that's going on in society is based on needs. How are we getting those needs met? But since we're talking about this gossiping, which is one of the biggest issues in school today, and this is why I say we should know and learn and teach our kids about emotional intelligence because they get to understand their behavior and how they can manage effectively and how it impacts their relationships, and they wonder about the sustainability of it. Boys have I'm telling you, like, I'm going to just say they have problems with the communication in so many different ways. We've talked about it. And all of us need work is what I'm saying. But there's certain things that you can see. We talked about. That there's commonalities out there that we have to acknowledge. So that gossiping that's going on, you know what I mean? If you can't say it to the other person and you're saying it behind their back, you know that's manipulation. And you know you're being passive aggressive. Because you can actually, once you see that that works, and this is a scary part, if you're not even called out on it and you see, imagine the power somebody has who's using their passive aggressiveness to get other people to go against each other. And they're not really called on it. And you know what? There are some who are playing like your best friend, talking in your ear, but at the same time talking behind your back. And then you're conflicting with this person. And it's all because that person that wants to remain your best friend is putting some stuff out there. And you know, you can see it happening. I see that show, the Atlanta Housewives. I was watching a little tidbit the other day. I seen something where I seen a lot of the manipulation going on between the housewives. And I can't get into these shows because I think that's going to be an issue. But I can say I see some manipulation going on. There's a group of women, and there's one woman who, if she ain't at the front, she's up there talking, and she's in some ear. And she knows she's manipulated, right? She knows she's manipulating Cynthia, right? Because Nene and Cynthia were best girls. And there was one that put her word in there. And there's also other ones who are being passive aggressive by starting trouble. So ones who've been best friends for a long time, the ones who realize they're best friends come in and they start manipulating. And then it triggers one and then it gets the rest of them joining in. Man, it's such a game. It's so complex. I wish I could talk to you all about it, but just watch. If you want to see the dynamics being played out and passive aggressiveness, just that show alone will show you so much passive aggressiveness that you're like, wow, why is that person? And people love it. That's why the show's one of the top shows. Because people love it. They love to see the manipulation because you know what? They're sitting back there smiling knowing, yeah, that's what we do. But I like it when you do it. Because you know what? There's consequences for it. So we love that part when we can watch other people get into these conflicts and almost fight each other. But when we do it, we know there's consequences, right? And it's not so entertaining because it really messes with your relationship and your life. But it is something that's really happening out there, right? And what about when people are, I hate that, when you talk to somebody and they know what you're talking about and they pretend that they don't know what you're talking about. And you're trying to get through them and you know they're taking advantage or using their personal power over you. They're pretending that they didn't even understand what you're talking about. So they put on a false face and you know they're very clear on what you were talking about and then doing it to get out of something that they don't want to be a part of, you know. And it's clearly, right, that it's clearly they're aware it's affecting you, but they try to pretend. Oh, I don't know. Oh, you gotta kind of voice my like I didn't understand what you're saying. So they're pretending all the way that they didn't have no knowledge of it, you know. And so they just try to pretend that they don't know the error of their ways. And I hate that fakeness, and it happens. But I see it. We talk about it. They, oh, I don't know, and you know exactly what. And it's basically they're trying to disassociate, right? That's what they're saying. They're trying to disassociate and use their passive aggressiveness by showing you that, oh, I can't relate to you. It happens. I don't like it. It's a form of manipulation. And see, and then the funny thing is, these people stick to that strategy, right? When you call them out and you say, no, I know exactly what you're doing. Oh, I don't know what you're talking about. And they know that they're manipulating, but they stick to the strategy and it just dogs you. It just makes you feel so bad. And you're just like, you know what? Honestly, this is the tester. And I don't know how much manipulation I'm going to take. I know you know what I'm talking about, but you're going to... And you got to think why they're doing that. And you have to go back and look at what some of the behavior that's causing some... Why are they playing? And most of the time, you can put your finger on it. You could. Because it's a strategy that they're using. It's part of their passive aggressiveness. Women have their ways of handling things too. They're good. They do it different than men. Oh yeah, they do it. When we talk about cheating, they do it too. They got their needs. It's different for many different people, but there are commonalities out there. There's passive aggressive men and passive aggressive women. We just wield our power in different ways. And we understand what work is going on. But some of us, just like I said, when it comes to the passive aggressive men, you have to be aware that a lot of them that aren't standing up, they're going out there and finding other ways to be passive aggressive. They're those egos that aren't being stroked. They're finding ways to get them stroked. They're finding ways to get out there and stand up through this manipulation, as opposed to being upfront. That's why it's passive aggressive. They're going about it indirectly, and women do it too. But I could just see it in those social circles with women. That's where it's dominating. That's where it's affecting these young girls in their relationship. All this passive aggressiveness, understanding and misunderstanding between the youth. And it even happens up in the Middle Ages. It's just a form of manipulation. But just to see it and to understand it, because what is the one thing when you know this is always, and you know that, and we shouldn't be using this term, but we do have to use this term in a sense. So when someone's being a passive aggressive and you call them on it, what's the first thing they say? Oh, you're crazy. You don't know what you're talking about. I know, and you just like, I know what you're doing, and I don't respect that, and I don't know what you're talking about, right? And you're just like, oh man, and it just makes you shake your head. And see, a lot of us don't put up with that too long because we know that we're not on the same level. And we don't, to me, that just mistrust comes in right there when they do too much of that. So you can't do too much of that. right? That stuff where you don't know what I'm talking about when I know what you're doing. See, you trying to explain your way through that too much, it becomes monotonous and exhausting, and that really, boom, that's when the relationship starts to take a dive. Because that person either is going to keep on doing it or they're going to move on. You know what I mean? They're going to say, you know what? I don't care. I don't like what's going on and I'm going to do what I do. And no, I'm not doing it. We don't like to be called on it because that's why they're doing it in the first place. So they want to avoid that confrontation. So this could last for a lengthy period of time. No joke. So you have to take these things serious. And you must understand that it's passive aggressive is not just because of this communicate. There's other things that contribute to the passive aggressive. You could have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Could be stress, right? You could be overstressed, so you are being passive aggressive. You don't know how to express yourself. You're going through a lot. It's built up in you. You did something you really didn't want to do, and it's causing you stress. Anxiety disorders, right? Depression, bipolar, substance abuse, right? Something like, maybe quitting something, like, could cause you to be passive aggressive. Bipolar, just schizophrenic. All these things could contribute to passive aggressive behavior. And people don't know how to stop it. And if you find yourself being passive aggressive in your relationship, using anger or what have you, this becomes a pattern of behavior within yourself. You're going to have to work it out. You got to stop this communication style. You have to learn how to be relating to others in a healthier manner. Right? You can't just keep this up. You have to learn to recognize this behavior. Perceptions have to be checked. You have to confront it. In a space that's safe, mind you, but you have to learn to communicate more effectively. So how do you do that? Well, one of the best ways to recognize this passive aggressive behavior and how it's impacting others as well as yourself is first you have to acknowledge and recognize that there is this behavior. It is actually going on. That's the best way to stop it. It's the best way to stop it in its tracks, especially this passive aggressive behavior. Become aware that you are reacting in this manner. You have to understand why your behavior needs to change. You have to realize this. You got to be less aggressive. Learn to be less aggressive and a little bit more direct. And you might need help with that. You're going to have to give yourself some time. You're going to have to understand that past history behavior that you've adopted, it's going to take some time to change. But the first step is to recognize change needs to occur. You're not going to be able to alter any of this behavior or decrease the manipulation or manage that anger if you're reactionary or overreactionary. You don't see it. You can be assertive. Like, say what you mean, right? But you don't necessarily need to be aggressive. You can be showing some clarity in your thoughts about your processes that's going on in your mind, your opinions. Just letting that other person know what you have on your mind clearly. And you're going to have to be more open to conflict and confrontation. And it's going to take work. Because you can see a lot of the people who are passive aggressive, they're going, and it so happens so frequently, it's unbelievable. You can have a passive aggressive person who's being bothered by one family member, but they're taking it out on another person. Because of that person, they don't even, number one, there's a power structure in play, they don't know how to communicate, or they're afraid of the person, or they just don't think the person's going to understand, or they might feel this other person will be able to handle it and not absorb it so much and not bring it back to them where it becomes conflict. So, you know what? That's the chosen path for them. You got to be assertive but not aggressive. And you got to be open to some confrontation. Get your needs expressed. Understand that you have to still say when things aren't up to par. It can be respectful, doesn't have to be aggressive, it could be direct, but hey, use I statements. I just gotta let you know I'm not comfortable when. A lot of times we get into problems when we're using that you make me feel this, you're that. So what does the other person do immediately to get their backs up? And they don't even want to hear from them. They shut down. So it's another cluster. It's another problem. So just keep that in mind. Be direct, but be respectful. I'm uncomfortable with this, respectfully, and that's going to work in your favor. Be positive about it. It's going to work in your favor a lot better when you think about it, when you're aware of it, and you use it consciously. And I always say that we have to build our confidence too. It's not easy. I make it sound easy for a lot of people when I talk about trying to manage this passive aggressiveness, and people say a lot of different things. But I do say that a lot of it, you got to start that personal power belief. You got to start working on that. Start doing some just some self-evaluation, and start understanding that you got to build your confidence up. You got to start believing in yourself, right? You don't want to keep sliding between these spectrum of frustration and anger and silence, you know what I mean, and using it to manipulate or create a situation that's in your favor. You have to learn to believe that, number one, you matter, and that you deserve to be heard, and you expressing yourself is valid. You gotta, and get rid of some of those fears, and understand that you are a person that matters, and you can believe in yourself, and your opinion matters. And like I said, if you grew up in a situation, you've experienced even a relationship where that person doesn't validate your feelings, that has to be looked to as well. Because you could be very justified in that feeling why you're not feeling your best or believing in yourself. Because this is the thing when you're with people. See, it's great to be with people. It really is. Especially in relationships. But we do have to understand that I always look at it like this. When you're in a relationship with a person, it's almost like you rub off on each other. And sometimes you start to believe what that other person's telling you. And vice versa. And you just start to get a little... So a lot of times your stuff is not your stuff anymore. Right? The things that you're thinking about. Because you're with that person so long. So there's some bias there. And you start to buy into it. That's what I'm talking about when you're with relationship. You have to be mindful of that. So when you want to believe in yourself... A lot of us only believe in what we hear our partners tell us about ourselves, or say about us, or treat us a certain way. So we start to get our confidence based on that, right? And when that's not enough, we become what? We start to get into that passive aggressive, where we start to hide and we start to manipulate and go around getting and figure things out through this way to get this thing dealt with. But the truth is, we have to start believing in ourselves and understanding that the less I fear these situations and the more upfront I am, the better I'm going to be. Is it going to be easy? No. But like I said, it's just about learning how to communicate effectively. Learning that you don't have to be aggressive. Learning that when people get loud, like in a relationship or even in a family situation where people have a way of communicating where one person starts arguing and one person starts to escalate. No. Instead of shutting down, right? Wait, be patient, learn a little bit about yourself and say, you know what? I'm only going to go when I'm comfortable, when I'm safe, but I am going to say my piece. because it's important for me. It's important. And you got to get back to that belief system. And I think that sometimes when we're in relationships, we stray a little bit about our personal wants and needs. So it's harder to express ourselves in certain situations. And that is so true for many different reasons. And there's people being passive aggressive just for those reasons because, you know, it's not as easy as a word in somebody's ear. Some people are passive aggressive and turn it into physical aggression. That's where it not only gets way out of hand, it could be frightening for a lot of people because the manipulation is going on and it becomes too much. And that's where people tend to get stressed and they tend to break down a little bit because of all this manipulation. You got to be strong and a little bit confident, you know, as an individual, and understand that, you know what? There's other ways to approach it. There's other ways to get my, right? It's going to take some time, but my peace matters. And I got to learn to get it through because it's coming out another way. And when it comes out certain ways with you, if you have children, it's going to come out that way too, right? That's just how it is. We can't deny it. We can't fight it in the sense that we have to realize what it is and work with it. And we know if we have passive aggressive friends, we don't need to just run from them. Sometimes just understanding that they're passive aggressive, it helps the relationship, right? Just understanding them better. Still trying to work with it. We can't solve everything, but we could try and work through things. And just understanding how to go about doing these tactics and strategies to make us better people is just, that's enlightening in itself. Not just solving every little problem, just knowing that you have the power to do that. That personal power. Now, personal power is that personal belief and that knowledge that, you know, you are going to be fine. You're going to handle things and you're open to change. And it's right, because I think people do a lot better when they know they have choices. The more choices they have, the less stressed they are in their lives, and the more they're optimistic about situations. And when people know there's alternative ways than aggression and manipulation, right, with this passive aggressiveness, hey, they're going to be, you know, a lot better off for it. And so will the rest